Good afternoon, everyone. Josh is Severe Weather, and hope you're having a great Thursday so far. We're going to continue to talk about the area we're watching in the Gulf of Mexico for gradual development and, more importantly, some maybe significant flooding rainfall coming for the Sunshine State here next week. And that will obviously have impacts with a lot of you cleaning up from last week's hurricane. More rain is not going to make things any better, unfortunately. So we're going to chat about that. We'll also take a look at the threat for having two major hurricanes farther out over the open waters of the Atlantic. That's Kirk and Leslie. And I'll also talk about what's going on here in parts of the Pacific Ocean. So thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. Big Florida rainstorm coming as we see low pressure moving into the southwestern Gulf and taking its sweet time to develop, but potentially getting up to tropical storm intensity at some point next week here in the central Gulf. I don't know yet if it's going to hit Florida directly as a tropical storm or as a remnant low, or will just sit around for several more days. But regardless, because of the system moving very slowly and linking up with a front to its north, the threat for heavy rainfall is going to be a problem, especially for South Florida and maybe for the west coast of Florida. But even the east coast of Florida, you are in potentially the path of this storm. Now, I know we've been talking about this for several days. As soon as Helene moved in, we could see how this would be a potential threat. There's still a lot of things that can change with this, and I don't think we're going to be talking about a copycat storm. I know some people chatted about that earlier this week, and perhaps it was to not just raise awareness, but maybe even take advantage of the folks that have been hit. That is never anything that really crossed my mind. All I can really say with confidence at this point is that the weather stays unsettled and that there could possibly be our next tropical storm. Milton would be the name on the list. But as we see here, sometimes storms that don't even get named or become lower end can cause major amounts of rainfall. We saw that here off the North Carolina coast a couple of weeks ago with the flooding in the Wilmington area. And we've seen that before in Florida as well early in the season. So right now, if you pull up the Hurricane Center map, you will see just two systems on the map. Hurricane Kirk, which is a major, strong Category 3 hurricane, and Tropical Storm Leslie, which will be a hurricane in a couple of days. But if you click on the 7-day, you will notice we continue to have this area to monitor across the Gulf of Mexico. And the Hurricane Center still does not believe it's going to develop between now and Saturday, but gives it a 30% chance of developing between later Saturday, probably more likely Sunday, Monday, or Tuesday of next week. You will see that the chances come down a little bit. I don't personally agree with this based on the modeling I'm going to show you in a little bit. But there is a chance, regardless, of heavy rainfall over portions of Mexico over the next few days, and then next week across portions of the Florida Peninsula. Notice how they no longer talk about the northern Gulf being an area to watch. I think we're primarily talking about Florida and Florida only at this point. So we are starting to see more folks getting power back in the southeast, but it's taken some time. A little bit better now in Taylor and Madison counties where you have a ton of cleaning up to do. Same for Dixie County. But the bigger problems are from Georgia to North Carolina, as you might imagine, with all the wind that we had. Still, most folks without power in Montgomery County, as well as Atkinson and Coffee counties, Jefferson, Glasscock, and Warren counties to the west of the Augusta area. And as we go farther north into the Carolinas, we continue to have lots of folks without power still across much of the upstate, especially in Edgefield, Laurens, and Greenwood County, but also Spartanburg County. Still about half of you don't have power. And in North Carolina, as you can imagine, with the major floods that we had, much of Mitchell County is still offline. Yancey and Avery County and McDowell, as well as Buncombe and Henderson, Rutherford, Polk, and Transylvania counties all continue to have lots of folks without power. It's getting a little bit better, but this is going to take a very long time to get some of these more remote places to get back to electricity. And don't want to forget southwestern Virginia. You too have several folks without power, still about 25,000. The map's not loading, but primarily in places like Russell County, Smith County, and still Grayson County. Most of you are just starting to see your power come back on today. Many more days potentially to get everybody's power back. So that's Helene. Here's a look at the tropics from the Atlantic Basin to the Pacific. Major Hurricane Kirk will probably be a Category 4 tonight. Tropical Storm Leslie is beginning to strengthen, but it is being impacted somewhat still by Kirk, which is the bigger of the two storms. Here's the remnant low, which came from the upper low of Helene. That is moving away from Bermuda in this direction very slowly. A non-tropical low here over the North Atlantic. And then we continue to watch this large gyre across the Yucatan Peninsula with multiple circulations. The main one, if you pin it down, is actually right near Cozumel and Cancun and heading in this direction. But there's a tropical depression here. There's a disturbance here, both affecting the southern portion of Mexico. And there's a bit of a weakness as well in the Bay of Campeche. And a lot of different players on the map keeping things very crowded right now, which will mean it's going to take some time to get everything here to develop. Here's a closer look at Hurricane Kirk. And here's Tropical Storm Leslie. And you're looking great across the Caribbean with the exception of Western Cuba and the Northern Cayman still dealing with wet weather. Here's a closer look at what's going on across the Gulf. And we do have moisture beginning to move up into Louisiana. I've seen thunderstorms near the mouth of the Mississippi. This area of rain will continue to expand northeastward over the next couple of days into coastal Mississippi, Alabama, and the western panhandle. There could be heavy rain out of this as well. You can see here some strong flow out of the east aloft. This is producing wind shear up and over this system. And we actually have the front basically right in here. So a lot of moisture convergence here, meaning we're going to see a lot of rain, mainly across the Gulf coastal waters. The area that we really need to watch is down in here, but right now, because of the wind shear and because of our tropical depression down here, you could see that it's not super well organized. And then take a look at this. We actually do have a spin right here approaching Cozumel, and that is going to move west-northwestward. And I think that's what's going to end up taking over here by the time we get to Sunday and Monday of next week. So there is good news as we continue this forecast going back to the end of last week. Everything's been delayed a little bit and is not looking as ominous, but there's a lot of rain out there, and a lot of rain will be falling as this system takes its sweet time evolving. Here's a look at the Pacific, and we have a tropical depression here over the Gulf of Tehuantepec. It will slowly move inland and weaken. A piece of that moisture comes westward, and we just don't really need any more rain across this area. Oaxaca's just gotten so much rain. Chiapas has gotten so much rain, and we again have the threat for extreme flooding. As bad as it looks here across parts of the mountains, the Appalachians, and the southeast, imagine that amount of rain falling and then double or triple that amount. That is what they're dealing with here in southern Mexico, yet we don't really hear about it on the news. So I want to show you all what is expected here with our future system, assuming it develops, which is still a bit of an assumption right now. So big area of high pressure builds in Friday and Saturday to the northeastern United States, but we have a weakness of low pressure below it here. As we move on in time, we will continue to see some troughing across the Gulf of Mexico. What happens is that ridge lifts away, another ridge builds in, and underneath it we have lower pressures aloft, a bit of a trough here, kind of oriented in this direction. This is going to feed some cooler air down, some dry air down into the Gulf region. It's going to feel great here next week over the Midwest and parts of the Northeast. But because we've got another ridge down here, the cold air is only going to get so far. And what happens is things get stuck and the steering gets a lot weaker. And when things are not steered, then they just kind of sit there and meander for several days. You can see until a ridge actually kicks us out, we may have the system in the area by the middle of next week still for another week or even longer. And we still have this trough across Florida, so it's not exactly drying out in a hurry. It may take until next weekend or possibly even later to see that occur. Big time trough over eastern Canada, even the week of the 14th of October. So definitely we're going to see unsettled weather in parts of New England and eastern Canada. We're probably going to be talking about higher elevation snow and cool, wet, showery weather, but definitely cooler than average as well in the Carolinas and the cleanup areas, and probably wet and muggy across the Florida Peninsula right through the middle of the month of October here. So that's what we're looking at in the days ahead. If we take a look at the European ensemble, you will see that despite the Hurricane Center only going with a 30% chance of development, there is certainly some signal that something may form here on Saturday or Sunday in the southwestern Gulf. As we move towards Monday and Tuesday of next week, you can see where that moisture is aimed, where our potential storm is going to go. So I do think we may see something form somewhere in here or here, a depression or maybe a low-end tropical storm. And it's tough right now to say exactly where that's going to be because we have these multiple features to track. But whatever takes over in here is eventually going to get pushed in this direction here towards Florida. It's possible it ends up going down in here, maybe a little bit north of Tampa Bay, and maybe it just gets stuck here to the west of Florida, which actually would not be a good thing either because then we are talking about more and more rain in the coming days. So yes, not really a threat to the Gulf Coast until you get south of the Big Bend, I think. Central and South Florida and the Florida Keys are going to be most potentially impacted by this next system. Here's a GFS ensemble as well. You can see the main low that takes over here as we get to Saturday. Very low impact system at this point, other than the rain. Pressures stay pretty low. And you can see there's a lot of wind shear moving through the northern Gulf of Mexico through the beginning of next week. So we may have a feature somewhere in this area, but if it gets north of this latitude here, the wind shear is going to be pretty strong, and so it should stay fairly weak, I would expect. As we move this along a little bit farther in time, you can see we still have something potentially lingering into the end of next week. In fact, take a look at this. We still have several ensemble solutions that keep this stuck in the Gulf, and almost as many taking it across Florida as a weaker system. So low pressure may sit and just kind of lollygag here for several more days. A piece of it could go across Florida. Then we may get a break. But as long as this hangs out, guess what? We're going to see moisture that gets fed up into the Western Bahamas, into Cuba, into Florida, and especially the Florida Keys. And if you're going to pick a week of the year to take a vacation to Florida, I would think this might be potentially the worst week in the peninsula, just based on the amount of rain that we may potentially be looking at. Here's the GFS operational model. You'll see a fairly weak system here. This is early next week, Monday afternoon. 1,002 millibar system, probably a tropical storm, a lower end one, I would think. And then this particular model takes it across Florida, but keeps a piece back in the southern Gulf into the second portion of next week. In fact, it pushes it back and it's just stuck. So it's still going to be wet down here south of this boundary. You see that? Here is a weak low pressure system. Here is where our front's going to be. And very nice, cool, dry flow here for Texas, Louisiana, and the Florida Panhandle. But where this boundary is, we continue to have the moisture get pumped through here. Just, it's a tale of two air masses here, unfortunately. And it may take us until maybe the 14th or 15th to get this system to finally clear out. Here's a Canadian model. This one's coming in a little bit weird, I think, but we definitely want to still watch it. You can see that rather than the storm hitting Florida, it actually goes down and hangs out around the Yucatan Peninsula, and then eventually gets lifted back up into the Gulf towards next weekend and strengthens. And this one has it going up towards the Big Bend region as a weaker system, a tropical storm or maybe a low-end hurricane. I'm not buying this right now. This is 10 days away, and we're talking about something that goes down into the Northwest Caribbean again and then comes back out into the Gulf a few days later. Again, a lot is going to potentially change. The Icon model is more in line with the GFS, low-end tropical system here Monday and Tuesday. And then we have kind of a system that will fall apart as it moves towards the Keys and get latched onto our front. And this actually is not a terrible forecast for Florida. It actually pushes everything down a little farther south into Cuba and into the central Bahamas. So that's what I'm rooting for. And then the European model here shows weak low pressure taking over the central Gulf here by early next week, and then heading into Florida by Tuesday night and Wednesday, and then another piece sticking around and camping out across the southern Gulf of Mexico. The longer something hangs out here, the more we need to be concerned. And I don't think we're going to see another Helene pop up, but we could see a storm that just hangs out forever and causes incredible amounts of rain. Here's the European AI showing a tropical storm moving in just north of Clearwater, Florida on Monday, so it's faster. And then it's out of here, and then we have quiet weather after that. That's not a bad forecast either, but it is a stronger system. We still have a lot of warm Gulf water, even if the wind shear is very high in here. So is the ocean water content. These temperatures are running 86 to 89 degrees, and the only cooling we've really seen over the last week is in this northern shelf here, which is not going to be really a factor here because our system's going to go south of that area. At least I think it will. So that's something to keep in mind here. The other thing is, look at all this precipitable water. This is moisture, and we see quite a bit of it moving into South Texas, Southeast Louisiana, and northern Florida here through the weekend. But our next front, when it comes down here, is going to push this southward by the beginning of next week. But it gets stuck, and we see incredible amounts of moisture over South Florida. I think we're definitely going to have tropical flood watches in effect, and we may have a tropical storm watch at some point here. I would say Monday night, Tuesday, or Wednesday, depending on where this forms. It doesn't clear South Florida. It's stuck here next weekend. It tries to retreat northward. We don't really get a true front to push this all out of here until possibly the 15th of October. And even then in the Florida Keys, it's questionable. So it is coming eventually, but it doesn't look like it's coming quickly here. Here's a look at what our models are predicting as far as total rainfall over the next week and a half. And a lot of Central and South Florida is picking up 6 inches or more of rain, potentially well over that. Taking a look at some individual models to give you an idea, you can see here just some moderate rain across Louisiana, Mississippi here through the weekend. moderate rain over the western part of Florida. Then it picks up by Monday, and take a look at this area of incredible rain. Tampa Bay area, we're seeing 18 inches of rain showing up on this run of the GFS, and it keeps piling up. In fact, this area of brown is off the charts. It is showing potentially well more than 20 inches of rain. You've had a lot of rain already. 20 inches on top of it's going to be a very bad situation. So the actual amounts here, you can kind of see breaking it down time by time. Southeast Louisiana this weekend, and then Western Florida Sunday afternoon and Sunday night could be a washout. Monday night and Tuesday for the eastern part of Florida, and then staying very wet Tuesday, Wednesday, and eventually Thursday and Friday it pushes into South Florida. Miami is in that, so is Broward County. The Florida Keys stay pretty wet as well. And if you're in the Keys right now, it looks like your worst time frame may not be till Thursday and Friday of next week, maybe even into the weekend. So this is still going to potentially change and waffle a bit, but take a look at some of these total rainfall amounts here on the latest GFS. 24 inches in Sarasota, 11 in Tampa, 15 just Brandon, 16 inches in Palm Bay, 22 in Port St. Lucie, 17 in West Palm Beach, Jupiter, 18 inches of rain, Daytona, 6 to 8, Orlando, 7, Kissimmee, 8 inches of rain, and South Florida, maybe 20 inches around Hallandale and Hollywood. Miami Shores could see 20 inches of rain, according to this one run. Key West, 10 inches of rain, but if you get up here to near Naples, it's over a foot. So again, this is one model run, but a large area picking up at least a foot of rain over the next 10 to 15 days is pretty significant. So that is what I have for you today on this. The good news is that nothing's happening quickly. The bad news is that nothing's happening quickly. So here's the rest of the Atlantic for you all to take a look. And here is Category 3 Kirk, which will be a Category 4 tonight, 140-mile-per-hour storm. Behind it here is Leslie, 45-mile-per-hour storm. After Kirk leaves, Leslie follows him almost into the same location. Now a Category 2 is being predicted. It may get to Category 3 past that 5-day point. Here's a look at Kirk, and you can see it's not rapidly intensifying, but it is a nice, tightly wound system fighting just a tiny bit of dry air on the northwest side, but a very healthy core in place here, and one that may continue to grow a little bit longer. And here is the official forecast track, going over very warm water over the next 2 days before it hits cooler waters and more wind shear by the time we get past this weekend. Here is Kirk's forecast here, and you can see pretty well forecast. Eventually, the remnants may make it up to Ireland and Wales and Scotland and southwestern England, but by then a much weaker system. But we're close to Cat 4 now. We'll probably get up to maybe 140, 150 miles per hour on this storm. The pressure on it may continue to drop down to as low as 930 millibars. That is high-end Category 4 intensity. It's a little stronger than what Helene was when it hit and around where Beryl was at its strongest point. It should start weakening when we get to late Friday night, Saturday morning, and then you can see the structure does get some dry air into the western side later this weekend, so it will start to weaken gradually and then will weaken more significantly early next week. Here's a look at Leslie, and you can see it's got a good-looking core right in here, but this is the outflow from Kirk, which is producing some northwest wind shear over it. And as a result, it's not going to strengthen very quickly until Kirk gets out of the way. After Kirk gets out of the way, it's got a pretty good chance of strengthening, but this may be a little bit aggressive over the next couple of days, but I think after this weekend, it does have a good chance to strengthen. And right now, no longer looking like it's going to be a threat to the islands. We're going to have to watch it, but you can see everything's shifted to the east of those islands. And a pretty good agreement on models. And we have several models going Category 2 and a few going Category 3 and 4 at this point. So, but again, it's a fish storm that's likely recurving. This is one outlier I'm not super worried about. And we'll have more time to watch it. Here is let me bring you the latest GFS real quick. And you can see here's Kirk, here's Leslie. Two strong storms, and those may be the last two big ones here out across the eastern Atlantic. And after that, a very low chance of development as high pressure starts building in. Here's the European, here's Kirk, and then here's Leslie. By the way, that's 928 millibars. Maybe it does get to Category 5 if the European is right. It's close. Here's Leslie, which it's showing being a Category 3, 948. That would be this time next week, and then recurving. And then it does show a weak system that may have a brief appearance after that. All right, let's look at the Pacific real quick. And this is Tropical Depression 11, a brief chance it gets to tropical storm strength, but it will come inland here across far eastern portions of Oaxaca, very close to Salina Cruz over the Gulf of Tehuantepec. And we're going to see incredible rains along into the east of the track of that system. It may or may not get the next name. I don't know, because it doesn't look super healthy with all this wind shear, but it is bringing a lot of rain. And we are looking at a slight chance it gets to tropical storm strength. But more likely, we're talking about some very heavy rainfall here. You can see amounts locally 8 inches or more over Oaxaca, 6 inches around Veracruz and Tabasco. Chiapas could see 6 inches, and Guerrero could also see 6 inches. I think I said those right this time. I'm learning. Here's your track here, Tropical Depression 11. And forget, some of these models just don't even know what's going on. They don't even think it's out there, to be honest with you. But interestingly, the remnants could get carried over into our broad Gulf system. And you can see the GFS tracks taking it across the central Gulf of Mexico as it gets absorbed in our future system, it looks like. And finally, we have a weakening storm now over Taiwan. This is Krathon, or Julian, now down to 50 miles per hour. It made landfall here about 8 to 10 hours ago as a Category 2, and obviously causing a lot of flooding across Taiwan, but the mountains are breaking it up significantly at this point. Nonetheless, a very bad situation for Taiwan. 3 days of very heavy rain across this area and strong winds over the southwestern coast. So I appreciate y'all's time today. I'll be back again tomorrow just after lunch. As always, I appreciate you all for your patience with me, for understanding that this weather continues to change. But I appreciate your support. And if you share with your friends and become a subscriber, I'm going to do my very best to help you out if you have any weather questions. All I ask is that you stay respectful here. We're all here to help each other out. This is my gift to you as a meteorologist, and as a Christian and as a follower in Jesus, it is my assignment to share with you the good news and to share with you the weather and to help folks be prepared for what may come next. For those of you that have been to my channel several times, you know that I like to share a quick devotional and talk about my faith a little bit. I understand if you're not a believer, that may not be what you want to hear today. That's why I leave it at the end, but you are still welcome here and you're still loved no matter what you believe. We talked about not conforming. We talked about Paul's letter to the church of Colossians, or Colossus, and I want to continue that theme today with the church of Rome, Romans 12, 9 through 21, the Christian lifestyle and love. I do this because I love you all, and I'm sincere about it, and I want to read what Paul says. Love must be sincere. Hate what is evil, cling to what is good, be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves, never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Share with the Lord's people who are in need. Practice hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. That's an important one, by the way. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Mourn with those who mourn. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position. Do not be conceited. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, "It is mine to avenge. I will repay," says the Lord. On the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to eat. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. And with the situation that we're seeing, election season, Hurricane Helene, there's a lot of evil out there, okay? There's a lot of disagreement. There are a lot of vengeful people. And the Lord warned us about this. But what I'm asking you to do is to love one another regardless, to take care of those less fortunate, to put yourself in other people's positions and shoes, and to not be vengeful to each other, to not take revenge, but instead to give everybody the benefit of the doubt and let God be the one who judges in the end. Leave that room for God's wrath and let him do what he needs to do. He has important laws. He sent his son to die on the cross for us, and no other loving God would ever do something like that, in my opinion. And that's the Lord I want to serve and follow. And I wanted to share that encouragement with you here today. Sounds like nobody here likes the rules, but you know what? We need to hear them. And we need to hear God's laws because they are the foundation of why we're here in the first place. So I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'm happy to pray for you if you have any prayer requests. I'll catch you again tomorrow. See you then.